At one point, Nokia was so dominant that its name almost became another word for mobile phone. It was in pockets, backpacks, taxis, offices, schoolyards, and remote markets where many people were buying their first real connection to the world. The brand felt practical, trusted, almost inevitable. And that is what makes the story strange. Nokia did not fall from weakness. It fell from a position that looked, from the outside, almost impossible to attack. This was not a company with no technology. It had engineers, patents, factories, carrier relationships, global distribution, and one of the strongest consumer brands on Earth. It had already built devices that could take photos, play music, browse the internet, run apps, and do many of the things people later associated with smartphones. But somewhere inside that strength, the shape of the business began to change. To understand Nokia, you have to start with what it actually sold. Nokia sold mobile devices, but its real product was reliability at global scale. It made phones that worked, phones that survived, phones with batteries people trusted, phones that carriers could sell, and phones that customers in very different markets could afford. A teenager in Europe, a professional in Asia, a taxi driver in Brazil, and a first-time mobile user in India could all enter the Nokia world at different price points. That was the brilliance of the model. Nokia was not only designing phones, it was building a machine that could understand local markets, manufacture at huge volume, negotiate with operators, manage supply chains, and release devices for almost every segment of the market. Premium phones, basic phones, business phones, music phones, camera phones. Nokia had a phone for nearly everyone. In the old mobile era, that was power. The phone was still mostly a physical product. The screen, the battery, the keyboard, the durability, the signal, the price, and the carrier relationship mattered more than a beautiful software universe. If the device worked, if people trusted it, and if stores and operators could move it, the business could scale. Nokia understood that world better than almost anyone. By 2007, the company reported more than 50 billion euros in net sales. A few years later, in 2010, even after the iPhone had already changed the conversation, Nokia still sold more than 450 million mobile devices. The headline numbers did not look like a collapse. They looked like a giant under pressure, but still very much alive. And this is where hindsight can make the story too easy. Today, it feels obvious that the future belonged to touchscreens, app stores, and operating systems. But at the time, Nokia's position still had logic. It had enormous volume. It had strong brand trust. It had deep relationships with telecom operators. It had customers in markets where expensive touchscreen smartphones were still out of reach. And it had Symbian, a smartphone operating system that already powered millions of devices. From inside Nokia, protecting that machine did not look irrational. It looked responsible. If you are selling hundreds of millions of phones, you do not casually burn the platform that carries your revenue. You do not abandon markets that still produce volume. You do not tell your supply chain, your carriers, and your engineers to stop supporting the products that pay the bills. The old business was not dead, it was still huge. But the problem was not that Nokia had no smartphones. The problem was that the meaning of a smartphone changed. Before the iPhone and Android era fully took hold, a smartphone could mean a more advanced phone. It could have email, a browser, a camera, music, maybe apps, maybe business tools. Nokia could compete in that world because it was still a device-first world. Then the smartphone became something else. It became a platform. The real value was no longer only inside the object you held in your hand. It was in the operating system, the app store, the developer community, the user interface, the services, the maps, the payments, the search layer, the cloud, and the habits that locked users in over time. Apple did not just introduce a phone, it changed what customers expected from a phone. Android did something just as important from the other side. It gave manufacturers a modern software foundation they did not have to build alone. Suddenly, companies could compete in smartphones without creating their own operating system from scratch. That attacked Nokia in two directions at once. At the top, the iPhone made software experience feel premium. Across the wider market, Android gave rivals a faster way to build modern smartphones. Nokia's old advantages did not disappear overnight, but they became less decisive. Durability still mattered, distribution still mattered, price still mattered, but the center of gravity was moving toward an ecosystem Nokia did not fully control. Symbian became the clearest example of that trap. For years, it had been an asset. It gave Nokia reach in smartphones before smartphones became mainstream. But as the market shifted toward touchscreens and app ecosystems, Symbian became harder to turn into a clean, modern consumer experience. Keeping it alive protected current sales, but it also slowed the move toward the next architecture. That is the cruel part of many business transitions. The old system is not useless. It is still generating revenue. It still has customers. It still makes the company look strong. But every month spent defending it can make the next system harder to build. Nokia was trying to change the engine while the plane was still in the air. It explored different paths. Symbian was still there. MeeGo appeared as a possible future. Lower-cost devices still mattered. Services and maps mattered. Developers needed clarity. Operators wanted products. Customers wanted phones now. Competitors were moving quickly. From the outside, this can look like confusion. From inside, it was the pressure of a company trying not to destroy a massive existing business before the replacement was ready. Then came the Microsoft decision. In 2011, Nokia chose Windows Phone as its principal smartphone strategy. Judged only by the outcome, it is easy to call it a mistake. But in the environment of the time, the decision had a clear logic. Nokia needed a modern platform quickly. Building a full ecosystem alone would take time, and time was exactly what the company no longer had. Android was available, but joining Android would have made Nokia one manufacturer among many, competing against Samsung and a growing army of low-cost rivals using the same software foundation. Nokia would have kept hardware scale, but it might have lost differentiation. Microsoft offered a different promise. Together, Nokia and Microsoft could try to build a third ecosystem. Microsoft had software resources, enterprise relationships, Bing, Office, developer tools, and the money to stay in the fight. Nokia had hardware design, carrier reach, global distribution, maps, and brand recognition in markets where Microsoft was weak. On paper, it was not madness. It was a strategic attempt to avoid becoming just another Android manufacturer. The mechanism behind the failure was more precise than bad management. Nokia was betting that a late third ecosystem could grow fast enough to replace a collapsing legacy ecosystem. That required developers to care, consumers to switch, carriers to support it, Microsoft to move fast, and Nokia's old customer base to transition before Android and iOS became too entrenched. Too many things had to go right at the same time, and the timing was brutal. Once Nokia signaled that Symbian was no longer the future, it weakened the old platform before the new one was strong enough to carry the company. Lumia phones began arriving, and some were genuinely well designed. But a good device was no longer enough. The question was not only, is this phone good? The question was, does this ecosystem have the apps, services, developer energy, and consumer momentum to become part of people's lives? That is where the gap became visible. In 2012, Nokia's devices and services net sales fell sharply. Smart device volumes dropped. Lumia sales grew, but not fast enough to replace what was disappearing. The bridge between the old Nokia and the new Nokia was too narrow, and the old ground was collapsing faster than expected. This was the point of no return. Nokia still had assets. It still had talent. It still had patents, maps, brand recognition, and manufacturing knowledge. But the consumer phone empire had lost control of the layer where value was moving. The company that had once controlled the device was now depending on another company's platform to stay relevant in the most important part of the market. By 2013, the answer was no longer to save the old empire. It was to save Nokia from the old empire. Microsoft agreed to buy substantially all of Nokia's devices and services business for 5.44 billion euros, including the phone business and a patent licensing arrangement. When the deal closed in 2014, it marked the end of Nokia as most people remembered it, the company that made the phone in your hand. But Nokia did not die. That is the part of the story many people miss. Before the Microsoft sale closed, Nokia had already moved to take full control of Nokia Siemens Networks, the telecom equipment business it had shared with Siemens. That decision gave Nokia a different future, less visible to consumers, but still deeply connected to the mobile world. Instead of fighting Apple, Samsung, and Android for the screen in your hand, Nokia moved deeper into the infrastructure behind the screen. Networks, patents, connectivity, telecom equipment, research, technology licensing. The business became less nostalgic, but more survivable. The Nokia name later returned to phones through licensing arrangements, but the empire itself had changed. The old Nokia was a consumer device giant. The surviving Nokia became a company built around the systems that help networks function. That ending is not as emotionally simple as Nokia failed. It is sharper than that. Nokia built one of the great hardware empires of the mobile age because it understood the phone market better than almost anyone. Its decisions made sense in the world that created its success: scale, reliability, distribution, segmentation, and carrier power. But when the market changed, the value moved above the hardware. It moved into software ecosystems. And when that happened, the same machine that made Nokia dominant became hard to turn. The lesson is not that strong companies ignore the future. Sometimes they see the future, but they see it through the structure of the business that made them powerful. They protect the revenue that still exists. They listen to the customers they still have. They trust the advantages that have worked for years. And when they finally move, they are not only competing against new rivals, they are competing against the weight of their own success. Nokia lost the phone empire because it did not control the new layer of value. But it survived because it still owned something deeper than nostalgia: technology, infrastructure, and the ability to rebuild around a different part of the market. The phone disappeared from Nokia's hands. The network remained.